Good evening and welcome back to the 2019 Global Landscapes Forum here in Luxembourg, where we're discussing breakthroughs in sustainable finance. I'm Natasha Elkington and I've been your host for the day. And for our last interview for the day, and in our last GLF actually for this year, I have Hans Loth, who is the Global Head of UN Environment Partnership at Rabobank. He is responsible for building and managing the bank's new strategic partnership, which is a keystone in the bank's global environmental work. Thank you for joining us, Hans. Thank you. So please tell us more about the partnership between UN Environment and Rabobank.
The partnership was, I think, announced 2 years ago now, where both UN Environment and Rabobank leadership decided to disperse $1 billion to farmers to enable them to produce food more sustainably than they have been doing. And that's not because they were not willing to, but they didn't have an option. And with the fund and the partnership that we're setting up, we try to make a difference and recognize that farmers in supply chains and food systems are price takers and need access to finance more than anything else. And we want to make a change and want to make a positive difference.
Okay, so you said it's 2 years ago. So what has been the progress that in the 2 years has?
The progress has been that we've set up a fund meanwhile, which takes apparently time, and that's market practice. It's terribly complicated with rules and regulations, but now we have it, and we're doing deals on 3 continents, so we're pretty proud.
Okay, amazing. So during today, in one of today's sessions at the GLF, you said that global finance regulators need to adjust regulations to ease investments in areas such as agriculture. Please explain further what you mean.
Yep. No, that's an important point, and I think it came back several times with different speakers, so I'm sure I'm not too far off. What it basically means is that when you look at agriculture, it's a segment that is cyclical. So banks do not really like that because the regulators require a certain portfolio to be profitable. And when things are uncertain, regulators don't like that. To allow for an envelope to do more riskier investments would help enormously, because many of the farmers that we're looking at are smallholders, and they have no access to finance and are perceived to be too risky to invest in. But if banks are allowed to at least have a certain degree of investment in that part of the supply chains, that would help them, but it would also help the food systems, and it basically would help the world, because it would allow them to come up with an alternative to deforestation.
Wow, very interesting. Oh, extremely interesting. Okay, and I guess for my final question is, we interviewed you in Nairobi at the GLF in 2018, and here we're in November 2019 in Luxembourg. Yes. So what progress have you seen since our last interview till today with the Global Landscapes Forum and sustainable finance landscapes?
I think that's a good question. I think the audience and the stakeholders, both on stage and off stage, recognize that there's a call to action, and I think there's just only one generation that allows us for that action. And we see the discussion become more specific and become more personal, for lack of better words, where we say that stakeholder needs to step up because of this or that stakeholder needs to do this or that. So it's becoming more tangible and specific. And I think that's what we need when you do a call to action. So it's less generic and way beyond PowerPoint. So it's really a group of people that knows what to do after today. And I think that's a big takeaway.
Great. I guess my final question is, I actually had an interview with Pierre Rousseau from BNP Paribas. Yes, and he mentioned that the issue is that it's always the usual suspects who come to sort of these forums, but we need to open it up to more banks and and the financials. How do you think we can achieve this?
That's a good question. I think by sharing Rolodex. And basically say, okay, these are the banks that should be and are part of the coalition of the willing. And sometimes you don't know, but you need to give it a second thought. and we know them, if you think about it, for a few minutes. And they are global, they are regional, and they're local, and we need all of them. I wouldn't go into a terribly boring jargon of bankers, but the financial supply chain is as equally as important as the food supply chain.
Right.
And to understand what bank does what, and what kind of financial player does what in financial solutions is key. And I think Pierre and I have discussed that quite a few times. And both he and I would recognize that neither BNP nor Rabobank would be the magic bullet. You need all of the above, and they need to be here. And they need to be at an event where they can hear and listen as well and join the party, because they will have skill sets that we don't.
Right. Okay. So I guess it's up to us, the GLF, to make sure we reach out to more banks to bring them in, or will you?
It's I think a team effort, because you wouldn't probably know who to call.
Exactly.
So we would be, need to be put in a position where we tell you who could be likely to pick up the phone, because there will be more banks that will recognize that, and that's an element of leadership that starts with a few banks, often goes down to people, especially in executive boards. But it needs to snowball, and it will. And I think Pierre and I and others, also HSBC is stepping up, by the way, know who would be inclusive to this way of thinking and partnering up.
Okay, so I guess that's our next project then with you.
And there's another one. There's another one where we need to invite governments to step in as well more. So it's not only private capital, but it's also public capital. And they need to realize that they play a catalyst role. So, big invitee list next time.
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you so much for giving us your time and for being our last interview of the day and for the year for the GLF. Thanks a lot, Hans. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you.